After 10 years of separation, Billionaire saw his ex on his way to airport, and he canceled the flight to run to her. "I didn't just leave because you were absent, Gary. I left because I was pregnant. And when I tried to tell you, you canceled dinner to fly to Chicago for a meeting that you said would change everything. I sat in our apartment for 6 hours waiting for you to come home. And you didn't. You didn't even call." Gary Reyes felt the words enter his body like shrapnel, each syllable tearing through tissue and bone until they reached the place where his heart used to beat with certainty. Across a small coffee shop table, Brenda Delacroix held her teacup with steady hands, but her eyes carried the weight of a decade spent carrying this truth alone. "Pregnant. You were pregnant. I lost the baby 3 weeks later. Stress," the doctor said. "My body wasn't ready, and you weren't there for any of it. Because you were in meetings, building your empire, becoming the man you thought you needed to be." Gary's vision blurred. 10 years of success, of magazine covers and Forbes lists and deals that made other men envious, collapsed into meaningless noise. He had spent a decade believing he understood why she left. He had been wrong about everything. "I didn't know. Brenda, I swear to you, I didn't know." "No, you didn't. And by the time I lost the baby, I was too angry and too broken to tell you. I needed to heal without you, away from the constant reminder that you had chosen your ambition over everything else. So I left, and I never looked back." The silence between them filled with ghosts. Conversations that never happened. Choices that couldn't be unmade. A child who never had the chance to exist. This was the moment Gary Reyes understood that his billion-dollar empire meant nothing. That every acquisition, every merger, every victory that had seemed so important was just expensive distraction from the emptiness her absence had left behind. But how did they get here? How did a billionaire end up in a crowded coffee shop, his $1,000 suit soaked with rain, his flight to Tokyo long departed without him? How did a chance encounter on a Seattle street corner lead to the revelation that would shatter everything he thought he knew? The answer begins 17 seconds earlier, in the back of a Lincoln town car, with a decision that would change 3 lives forever. Have you ever seen someone and felt your entire world stop? Have you ever had that moment where your body moves before your brain catches up? Where logic disappears and pure instinct takes over? Where you do something so completely out of character that you barely recognize yourself? This is that story. A story of second chances and decade-old secrets. Of a woman who survived what should have broken her. Of a man who finally learned that success without love is just expensive loneliness. And of a little girl who would teach them both what family really means. Before we begin, I need you to think about someone in your life you've lost touch with. Someone who crosses your mind at unexpected moments. Someone you wonder about when the night gets quiet and the distractions fall away. Keep them in your heart as we explore what happens when fate gives us one more chance to make things right. If this story speaks to you, if you believe in the possibility of redemption and second chances, like this video right now and subscribe. Because trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment everything changed. The Lincoln town car glided through downtown Seattle with the kind of silence that only money could buy. The world outside reduced to a blur of glass towers and October rain, gray skies pressing down on a city that had long since made peace with perpetual dampness. Gary Reyes sat in the back seat, scrolling through emails that demanded attention he couldn't quite summon. His mind was already halfway to Tokyo, already running through the talking points for the merger that would define the next decade of Reyes Global Industries. $14 billion on the table, a deal that would make him untouchable in an industry where everyone was always looking for weakness. His thumb hovered over an email from his Tokyo team, something about last-minute contract revisions, something about liability clauses that needed immediate attention, something that should have mattered more than it did. 10 years. That's how long he had been building this empire, brick by calculated brick, deal by strategic deal, until his name appeared on lists that his father had once said would never include a Reyes. Until his face graced magazine covers with headlines about self-made success and visionary leadership. The irony was not lost on him. His father had been dead for 8 years now. Heart attack in the middle of an argument about Gary's life choices, never seeing the empire his youngest son would build. Never having the chance to admit he had been wrong. Gary had spent his entire adult life proving himself to a ghost who could no longer acknowledge the proof. "Mr. Reyes, we're approaching the terminal." Marcus spoke from the driver's seat, his voice carrying the professional neutrality of someone who had learned not to expect personal conversation. "Your flight departs in 90 minutes. Gary nodded without looking up, his attention fixed on the email that suddenly seemed less urgent than it had 30 seconds ago. There was something restless in his chest, something he had learned to ignore over the years, a hollowness that success had never managed to fill. The car slowed at a crosswalk, waiting for pedestrians to clear before continuing toward the airport. Gary glanced up out of habit rather than interest. Just another Seattle intersection. Just another moment in a life measured by destinations and departures. And then the world stopped. She was standing on the corner, waiting for the light to change. A coffee cup in one hand, an umbrella in the other. Her dark hair was shorter than he remembered, cut to her shoulders in a way that made her look older, sharper, more defined. She wore a camel coat over what looked like a business dress, her posture carrying the kind of confidence that came from surviving things that should have broken her. Brenda, the name hit him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs, replacing it with something that felt like equal parts grief and recognition. 10 years collapsed into nothing, and suddenly he was 26 again, holding her in a cramped Portland apartment, promising her forever while having absolutely no idea what that word actually meant. Brenda Delacroix. She hadn't seen him. She was looking at her phone, probably checking the time, probably late for something important. The light was about to change. In seconds, she would cross the street and disappear into the Seattle crowd, and he would continue to the airport, and they would remain exactly what they had been for the last decade. Strangers who used to know each other, ghosts who used to be real. "Stop the car." Gary heard himself say the words before conscious thought could intervene. His hand was already reaching for the door handle, his body moving with a certainty his mind had not approved. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror, confusion flickering across his professional features. "Sir, your flight, the merger, your team in Tokyo is expecting you to cancel it." 2 words, 24 letters. A decision that would cost him $14 billion and whatever remained of his carefully constructed reputation as a man who never let emotion interfere with business. Marcus hesitated. "Mr. Reyes, I don't think you understand. The board specifically requested your presence. This deal has been in negotiation for 18 months. If you don't," I said, "cancel it." Gary was already opening the door, already stepping out into the rain that immediately soaked through his custom suit. The cold hit him like a physical shock, but he barely registered it. His eyes were fixed on her, on Brenda, on the woman he had spent 10 years trying not to think about. He moved toward her with a desperation he hadn't felt since the night she left, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles, his $1,000 suit ruined within seconds. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered except reaching her before the light changed, before she disappeared again. "Brenda." He said her name like a prayer, like a question, like the answer to everything he had been searching for without knowing he was searching. She looked up from her phone, and he watched recognition dawn across her features like sunrise after an endless night. First, confusion, the polite blankness of someone approached by a stranger. Then shock, her eyes widening, her lips parting slightly. Then something else, something guarded and careful, something that hurt more than outright hostility would have. "Gary." She said his name like she was testing whether it would burn her tongue. "What are you doing here?" It wasn't really a question. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of someone who had practiced keeping her emotions carefully contained. Gary wondered when she had learned to sound like that. The Brenda he remembered had been incapable of hiding anything she felt. Her joy and her anger and her passion had always been written across her face like headlines. "I don't know." He admitted it honestly. Rain streaming down his face, his suit plastered to his body, his flight to Tokyo growing more distant by the second. "I saw you, through the car window, and I couldn't not stop. I've spent 10 years trying not to think about you. And then there you were, standing on a corner in Seattle like you'd been waiting for me to find you. And I couldn't drive past. I couldn't pretend you were just anyone." Brenda's expression shifted through several emotions he couldn't quite read. She had always been better at guarding her feelings than he was, at building walls that looked like doors until you tried to walk through them. But now those walls seemed reinforced with steel, impenetrable in ways they hadn't been before. "You're getting soaked." Her observation was practical, almost clinical. like she was noting a fact rather than expressing concern. "There's a coffee shop half a block from here. If you want to talk, we can talk there." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of careful boundaries. "But Gary, I need you to understand something before we go anywhere. Anything. I'm not the same person I was when I left. Whatever you're looking for, whatever closure or redemption or nostalgia brought you out of that car, I might not be able to give it to you. I've built a life that doesn't include you, and I'm not interested in rebuilding it around your schedule." The words were direct, unflinching, exactly the kind of honesty that had first drawn him to her a lifetime ago. She had always been able to see through him, to cut through his defenses and his performances and find the real person hiding underneath. It had been terrifying then. It was terrifying now. "I'm not looking for anything except answers," Gary replied, trying to match her directness even though his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. "And maybe the chance to apologize for things I should have understood 10 years ago." Something flickered in her eyes at that. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it. A crack in the wall that might be wide enough to slip through. One coffee, and then I have somewhere I need to be. She turned and began walking toward the coffee shop without waiting for his response. Gary followed, leaving behind the Lincoln Town car, the flight to Tokyo, the $14 billion merger, and whatever remained of the man who would have chosen all of those things over this. The coffee shop was warm and crowded, the kind of place where conversations happened in hushed tones over oversized mugs. Steam rising from cups, the smell of roasted beans mixing with the sweetness of pastries. Soft music playing just loud enough to provide cover for private discussions. They found a corner table near the back, away from the noise of the espresso machine, away from the line of afternoon caffeine seekers, two people with a decade of history trying to pretend they were simply strangers meeting for the first time. Gary ordered black coffee out of habit, the same order he had made thousands of times in thousands of meetings. Brenda ordered chamomile tea, and he noticed she no longer drank espresso. No longer had that specific restless energy that used to keep her awake until 3 in the morning chasing dreams that always seemed just out of reach. She had changed, in ways visible and ways he could only sense. The sharpness of her features, the steadiness of her hands, the way she held herself like someone who had fought battles and won them, like someone who no longer needed anyone's approval to know her own worth. "You look different," Gary said once they were seated, the obvious statement of a man buying time while he figured out what to actually say. "Successful, settled, like you found something you were looking for." "I am both of those things," Brenda replied with a slight nod. Her fingers wrapped around her teacup like she was drawing warmth from it, even though the shop was already warm. "I run a nonprofit that helps trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. We have offices in 6 cities, partnerships with major corporations. Last year we helped over 2,000 women find safe housing and employment." She paused, and something softened in her expression. "It's not the art career I thought I'd have, but it matters more than anything I could have painted." Gary absorbed this information with visible surprise. The Brenda he had known had been an artist, passionate and talented, determined to make her mark on gallery walls rather than conference rooms. She had talked about her paintings the way other people talked about their children, with love and pride and unwavering dedication. What changed? Everything. She stirred her tea with methodical precision, the gesture of someone choosing her words carefully. "After I left Portland, I spent 6 months trying to figure out who I was without you. I traveled. I worked odd jobs. I made a lot of mistakes. And then I met someone who had survived something terrible, someone who needed help that I was uniquely positioned to give. And I realized my skills could be used for more than self-expression. Art became a tool for healing rather than a career to chase. I found purpose instead of just passion." "That sounds like quite a journey." "It was exactly as difficult as it sounds." Brenda set down her spoon and met his eyes directly. "But I'm not interested in discussing my personal evolution with you, Gary. You said you wanted to apologize, so apologize. And then explain to me why you just canceled what I'm assuming was a very important flight to chase a woman you haven't seen in a decade." The directness should not have surprised him, but it did. The Brenda he remembered had been softer, more willing to dance around difficult conversations, more inclined to protect other people's feelings even at the expense of her own truth. This woman was a blade, honed by years of handling hard truths and harder situations. "I destroyed us," Gary said simply. No preamble, no excuses, just the fact that it haunted him for 10 years. I was so focused on proving myself, on building something that would make my father regret every cruel thing he ever said to me, that I forgot to pay attention to what actually mattered. You needed me present, and I was always somewhere else, always chasing the next deal, the next opportunity, the next proof that I was worth something. He paused, feeling the weight of confession pressing down on his chest. I chose my ambition over our future, and by the time I realized what I had done, you were gone. Your number was disconnected. Your apartment was empty. Your friends wouldn't tell me where you went. It was like you had vanished completely, and I spent months trying to find you before I finally accepted that you didn't want to be found. That's accurate, Brenda acknowledged, her expression unreadable. But it's not the whole story. Gary felt something cold move through his chest, a premonition of pain he didn't yet understand. What do you mean? She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers still wrapped around her teacup, her eyes looking at something far beyond the walls of this coffee shop. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of a decade of silence. I didn't just leave because you were absent, Gary. I left because I was pregnant, and I was terrified. And when I tried to tell you, you canceled dinner to fly to Chicago for a meeting that you said would change everything. I sat in our apartment for 6 hours waiting for you to come home. And you didn't. You didn't even call. The words landed like bombs, each one detonating in Gary's chest with devastating precision. The coffee shop noise faded to nothing. The other customers disappeared. There was only Brenda and her words and the truth that was rewriting everything he thought he knew about why she left. Pregnant. You were. His voice cracked. Failed him completely. I lost the baby 3 weeks later. Brenda continued, her voice steady with the kind of practiced calm that came from telling this story before. To therapists, to close friends, to herself in the darkness of too many sleepless nights. Stress, the doctor said. My body wasn't ready. And you weren't there for any of it, because you were in meetings, building your empire, becoming the man you thought you needed to be. Gary felt the world tilt sideways, felt 10 years of carefully constructed success reveal itself as the hollow shell it had always been. He had thought he understood why she left, thought it was simply about his absence, his workaholism, his failure to prioritize their relationship. But this was something he had never imagined. I didn't know, he whispered, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. Brenda, I didn't know. No, she agreed, her eyes meeting his without flinching. You didn't, and by the time I lost the baby, I was too angry and too broken to tell you. I needed to heal without you, away from the constant reminder that you had chosen your ambition over everything else. So I left. The silence between them stretched, filled with the ghosts of conversations that never happened, of choices that could not be unmade, of a child who had never had the chance to exist. Before we continue with this moment that's about to reshape everything, I need to pause and speak directly to you. This is the truth at the center of this story, the secret that Brenda carried for 10 years, the devastation that Gary never knew he caused. If this is hitting hard for you, if you've ever experienced loss that you couldn't share with the person who should have been there, if you've ever carried a weight that no one else could understand, you're not alone. This story is touching something real, because these experiences are real. They happen to real people every single day. Like this video, if this is resonating, share it with someone who needs to know that healing is possible, even from wounds this deep. And stay with me, because we're just getting started. What happens next will test everything we think we know about forgiveness and second chances. I would have come, Gary finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. If I had known, if you had told me, I would have been there. Would you? Brenda's voice was soft but unflinching. Because you had promised to be there for dinner, and you weren't. You had promised we would build a life together, and you were always building something else instead. I didn't tell you because I had stopped believing your promises meant anything. The accusation hit its mark because it was true. Gary had been a man of words without follow-through, of grand gestures that never translated into daily presence. He had loved Brenda with the kind of consuming passion that made for good poetry but poor partnership. You're right, he said, and the admission tore something loose inside him. I was a man of pretty words and empty actions. I made promises like they were free, like they didn't cost anything, and then I broke them whenever something more important came along. Except nothing was more important. I just didn't know that until you were gone. Brenda studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She had spent 10 years learning to protect herself from hope, learning to build walls that couldn't be breached by apologies or explanations, learning that some damage couldn't be undone no matter how sincerely the person responsible wanted to fix it. "Pretty words," she finally said. "But I've heard your pretty words before. They didn't mean much when you were canceling dinner for the 3rd time in a week, when you were taking calls during our anniversary, when you were always choosing something over me." "I know." Gary's voice was thick with emotion he had spent years learning to suppress. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know sorry doesn't begin to cover what I did to you, what I failed to be there for. But Brenda, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for another chance with you. I'm just asking you to know that I understand now, that I've spent years in therapy learning why I pushed away everyone who ever tried to love me. That the first have changed, not for you, not because I hoped this moment would ever come, but because I finally understood that the man I was could never be happy, no matter how successful he became." For a moment, something shifted in Brenda's expression, a crack in the armor she had spent so long constructing, but then it closed again, sealed by years of protecting herself from exactly this kind of moment. "Why did you really stop the car, Gary?" she asked, redirecting the conversation away from dangerous territory. "You could have driven past. You could have caught your flight and never thought about me again." "Because I've been thinking about you for 10 years, Gary admitted. "Every success, every achievement, every moment that should have felt like victory. I've wondered what it would have meant if you had been there to share it. I built an empire, Brenda, but I built it alone. And somewhere along the way, I realized that alone is just another word for incomplete." He paused, gathering the courage to say what he had never admitted to anyone. "My father died 8 years ago. Heart attack, right in the middle of an argument about my life choices. He never saw what I built, never had the chance to admit he was wrong about me. And I spent years afterward realizing that I had been building everything for a ghost, trying to prove myself to someone who could never acknowledge the proof. And the whole time, the person whose opinion actually mattered, the person who believed in me before I had anything to show for it, that person was gone, because I drove her away." Brenda was quiet, her tea growing cold in her hands, the coffee shop bustling around them while they sat in a bubble of suspended time. "I can't give you absolution, Gary. I can't tell you that everything is okay now, because it's not. 10 years don't just disappear because you've had some realizations. The baby I lost doesn't come back because you're sorry. I know, but..." She hesitated, and Gary held his breath. "I have to pick up my daughter, and I don't have time to continue this conversation today." Daughter. The word hit Gary like another blow, another piece of information that reshaped everything. "Not yours," Brenda clarified quickly, reading the question in his eyes. "I got married 5 years ago, divorced 3 years later, but I kept my daughter, and she's the best thing that ever happened to me. Her name is Violet. She's 7 years old, and she's waiting for me at her school." Gary absorbed this information with a mixture of relief and something else he couldn't quite name. Brenda had moved on, had built a life, had found love and created family, even if that family had eventually broken in different ways. "You have a daughter," he said, trying to wrap his mind around this new reality. "I do, and she's my priority. Everything else comes second to her." She stood, gathering her coat and umbrella. Gary felt the familiar panic of watching her prepare to leave, the same panic he had felt 10 years ago when he came home to find her side of the closet empty. "Can I meet her?" The question surprised them both. Gary had not planned to ask it, had not even known he wanted it until the words were already out. Brenda laughed, a short, surprised sound. "You want to meet my daughter? Why?" "Because she's part of your life now. Because if there's any chance of us being in each other's lives again, even just as friends, I want to know the people who matter to you." "We're not going to be friends, Gary," Brenda said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "We have too much history for that." "Then what are we going to be?" The question hung between them, unanswerable and essential. Two people who had loved each other, destroyed each other, spent a decade healing from each other, now standing in a coffee shop trying to figure out what comes next. "I don't know," Brenda admitted, "but I'm not willing to figure it out in a coffee shop while my daughter waits for me. If you're serious about this, if you really have changed, then you'll understand that I need time to process this conversation. You'll understand that I'm not going to make any decisions based on one rainy afternoon and a decade of heartbreak." She pulled a business card from her purse and slid it across the table. The logo was elegant, professional, the name of her foundation printed in clean letters. "My foundation's contact information. If you're still interested in having this conversation in a week, call me. If you're not, if this was just a moment of nostalgia that passes once you're back in your normal life, then don't." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I've healed from losing you once. I'm not interested in doing it again." She left without looking back, walking out into the Seattle rain like she had practiced walking away from hard things until it became effortless. The bell above the door chimed as she disappeared into the gray afternoon. Gary sat alone at the corner table, her business card in his hand. His flight long since departed without him. The merger in Tokyo waiting for him to make decisions he no longer cared about making. For the first time in 10 years, that didn't feel like failure. It felt like the beginning of something else entirely. The days that followed were nothing like Gary had experienced before. The Tokyo deal collapsed without his presence. His board demanded explanations he couldn't give. His assistant fielded calls from angry investors while Gary sat in his Seattle hotel room, staring at a business card and wondering if he had lost his mind. A week passed. Then two. The man who had built an empire on decisive action found himself paralyzed by uncertainty. Every time he reached for his phone to call the number on the card, something stopped him. Fear. Doubt. The voice in his head that sounded exactly like his father, telling him he was a fool for throwing away everything he had worked for over a woman who had made it clear she didn't want him. But underneath the fear was something else. Something stronger. The image of Brenda's face when she told him about the baby. The grief in her eyes that hadn't faded even after 10 years. The knowledge that he had caused that grief through his absence, through his choices, through his relentless prioritization of things that didn't actually matter. Gary had spent his whole life building companies, portfolios, reputation. He had never learned how to simply be present, how to show up without an agenda, how to love someone without making it about his own need for achievement and validation. But maybe it wasn't too late to learn. 2 weeks became a month. Gary threw himself into research about Brenda's foundation. He read every article, watched every interview, studied the organization she had built from nothing while raising a child and healing from wounds he had helped create. The foundation was impressive, more than impressive. It was changing lives, providing safe housing and job training for trafficking survivors, creating pathways to independence for women who had been told they were worthless, building community among people who had been isolated and exploited. This was what Brenda had become, not the artist who painted beautiful things for galleries, but the warrior who built beautiful things for people who had nothing. Gary made anonymous donations, large enough to matter, not so large that they would seem like manipulation. He wasn't trying to buy his way back into her life. He was simply supporting work that deserved support. And then, exactly 33 days after their coffee shop conversation, he called. Gary Reyes for Brenda Delacroix. His voice was steadier than he felt, his heart pounding like he was 26 again, nervous about impressing a girl who saw through every mask he had ever worn. "One moment, please." The hold music was classical, elegant, exactly what he would have expected from an organization that helped survivors reclaim their dignity. 3 minutes passed that felt like 30, and then her voice came on the line. "You waited longer than I expected," she said by way of greeting. "I wanted to make sure this wasn't just a moment of nostalgia," Gary replied, gripping his phone tighter than necessary. "I wanted to be certain I was calling because I've actually changed, not because I was chasing something comfortable." "And what did you decide?" "That I've changed. That I'm calling because I want to know the woman you've become, not because I'm trying to recapture the woman you were. That I understand you don't owe me anything. Not forgiveness, not a second chance, not even another conversation. But I'm asking anyway, because the alternative is spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been." The line was silent for so long that Gary thought she might have hung up. "My daughter has a dance recital on Saturday," Brenda finally said. "It's at the community center on Pike Street. The show starts at 3. If you want to see what my life looks like now, you can come." She paused, and Gary held his breath. "But Gary, this isn't a date. This isn't a reconciliation. This is me showing you who I am so you can decide whether you're actually interested in that person or just the memory of someone who doesn't exist anymore. "I'll be there," Gary promised. "And Brenda, thank you for giving me this chance. Don't thank me yet." She replied, "Show up. That's what matters now." The call ended. Gary sat in his hotel room, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone like it might tell him what came next. Show up. 2 words. A simple instruction. The thing he had failed to do 10 years ago. The thing that had cost him everything. This time, he wouldn't fail. The community center was nothing like the venues Gary usually frequented. No valet parking. No crystal chandeliers. No waiters circulating with champagne trays and knowing smiles. Just a parking lot full of minivans and sensible sedans. A lobby decorated with children's artwork in mismatched frames. The kind of organized chaos that came from too many excited children and their even more excited parents. Gary had arrived 15 minutes early. A habit from his business life that suddenly felt less like efficiency and more like desperation. He stood near the entrance, checking his phone repeatedly, even though there was nothing to check. Watching the door. Waiting. He had changed clothes 3 times that morning. Discarding suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent in favor of something simpler. Dark jeans. A navy sweater. Casual shoes that had never touched pavement before today. He wanted to look like he belonged here. Like he was just another person coming to watch children dance. The irony was not lost on him. Gary Reyes, whose name appeared on buildings and whose face appeared in financial magazines, trying desperately to blend into a crowd of suburban parents at a community center recital. A woman with a clipboard approached him. "Are you here for the fall showcase?" She asked with the efficient friendliness of someone who had asked the same question 100 times already. "Yes, I'm here to see Violet Delacroix perform." The woman checked her list. Violet's in the butterfly group. They perform 3rd. Seating is open, so find wherever you're comfortable. Programs are on the table by the door. "Thank you." Gary took a program and found a seat near the back of the auditorium. The space was modest. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows. A small stage with a curtain that had seen better decades. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead with the particular hum of underfunded public spaces. And yet there was something warm about it. Something genuine. Parents leaning across seats to chat with each other. Grandparents clutching phones ready to capture every moment. Siblings fidgeting in their chairs, bored but present because family meant showing up. This was a world Gary had never known. His own childhood had been filled with private tutors and boarding schools. Achievements measured in grades and awards rather than in the simple fact of someone being there to witness them. His father had attended exactly one of Gary's events, a debate tournament that Gary had won. His father's only comment afterward had been that Gary's closing argument had been weak. The seats filled around him. The noise level rose. And then Gary saw her. Brenda entered through the side door, holding the hand of a small girl with dark curls and an enormous smile. Violet. It had to be Violet. She was a miniature version of her mother. The same determined chin, the same expressive eyes. But where Brenda's features had sharpened with time, Violet's were still soft with childhood, open and trusting in ways that experience had not yet worn away. Violet was talking a mile a minute, her free hand gesturing wildly as she explained something that was clearly of tremendous importance. Brenda was listening with complete attention, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that made Violet's eyes light up even brighter. This was what he had missed. Not just a relationship, not just a partner, but the capacity to be fully present with another person, to make their concerns your concerns, to show up not just physically, but emotionally. He had never learned how to do that. His father certainly had never modeled it, and by the time Gary had met Brenda, he had already been too damaged to understand what she was offering, too focused on proving himself to appreciate someone who had already accepted him exactly as he was. Brenda found seats near the middle of the auditorium. She had not seen Gary yet. She was still focused on Violet, smoothing the girl's hair, whispering something that made Violet giggle. Then a woman in a recital t-shirt appeared and collected Violet along with several other children, presumably to prepare backstage. Once Violet was gone, Brenda's posture changed. Some of the warmth faded from her shoulders. The alertness returned. The awareness that she was more than just a mother at a recital. She was a woman whose life had taught her to always watch for danger. She scanned the crowd, looking for someone, looking for him. Their eyes met. Gary felt the impact like a physical jolt. 10 years of distance collapsing into nothing. the coffee shop conversation replaying in his mind, the revelation that still kept him awake at night, the baby he had never known about, the grief he had never been present to share. Brenda's expression was difficult to read. Surprise, maybe, that he had actually come, or perhaps recognition that this was different, that his presence here meant something it never would have meant 10 years ago. She raised one hand in a small wave, acknowledging him without inviting him to join her, maintaining the boundary she had established while also honoring the invitation she had extended. Gary nodded back, staying in his seat near the back, respecting the space she needed, proving through action rather than words that he could follow her lead instead of always demanding that others follow his. The lights dimmed. The crowd quieted. A woman in a sparkly jacket took the stage and welcomed everyone to the annual fall showcase. She thanked the parents and volunteers and local businesses who had made the event possible. She reminded everyone to silence their phones. She promised that the next hour would be filled with talent and joy. And then the performances began. The first group was toddlers, barely coordinated bundles of energy in matching tutus who mostly wandered around the stage looking confused while their parents laughed and took approximately 10,000 photographs. The second group was slightly older, more choreography, fewer confused wanderings. The music was from a Disney movie Gary vaguely recognized. And then the butterfly group took the stage. Violet was in the front row. Her costume was blue and silver, wings attached to her back that caught the light when she moved. Her expression was focused, determined. She was taking this very seriously. The music started. Something classical, something that built slowly from quiet to soaring. And the children began to dance. Gary had attended ballet at Lincoln Center, opera at the Met, performances by artists whose names commanded millions. But he had never seen anything as beautiful as this. A group of 7-year-olds dancing their hearts out on a community center stage. Passion in their eyes that had nothing to do with technical perfection and everything to do with pure joy. Violet was not the best dancer in the group. She missed a few steps, got slightly out of sync during one section, but she performed with complete commitment, never losing her smile, never letting a mistake diminish her enthusiasm, dancing like the only thing that mattered was this moment, this music, this opportunity to be exactly who she was. Gary found tears in his eyes. He blinked them back, focused on the stage, on the small girl who contained pieces of the woman he had loved and lost, on the life Brenda had built, the family she had created, the happiness she had found without him. When the performance ended, Violet took her bow with the others. Then she spotted her mother in the audience and waved so enthusiastically that her wings nearly fell off. Brenda waved back, her face transformed by pride and love, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with physical appearance and everything to do with the person she had become. Before we continue with what happens next, I need to pause and speak to you directly. We're at a turning point in this story. Gary has shown up. He's watching from the back of the room. He's seeing Brenda's life without him, the daughter she's raising, the joy she's found. But showing up once is easy. Anyone can show up once. The question is whether he can keep showing up, day after day, week after week, even when it's inconvenient, even when his old life calls him back. If you've ever wondered whether someone could really change, whether the person who hurt you could become someone worthy of trust, this is the story that will answer that question. Like this video if you're invested in seeing what happens. Subscribe if you haven't already. And stay with me, because what comes next will test everything Gary thinks he's learned. After the showcase ended, the auditorium dissolved into chaos. Children running to their families, parents congratulating each other's kids, the noise level rising to something approaching a small concert. Gary remained in his seat, watching as Brenda made her way through the crowd toward the backstage area where Violet was presumably waiting. He had not planned what to do next. The invitation had been to come, to see her life. He had done that. Perhaps he should leave now, give her space, wait for her to reach out. But before he could decide, a small figure appeared at his row. "You came," Brenda said. Violet was holding her hand again, now changed out of her costume in irregular clothes, a purple sweater, jeans with butterflies embroidered on the pockets. Her wings were gone, but her smile was still firmly in place. "I said I would. You've said a lot of things over the years." Brenda's voice was not unkind, just factual, a simple acknowledgement of history. "I know. I'm trying to make my actions match my words now, however long that takes. Violet tugged at Brenda's sleeve, her patience for adult conversation apparently limited. Mommy, who is that man? Her voice was curious rather than suspicious. The question of a child who assumed the world was basically friendly until proven otherwise. Brenda knelt down to her daughter's level. The gesture was so natural, so loving. Gary felt his chest tighten watching it. This is an old friend of Mommy's. His name is Gary. He came to watch you dance. Violet considered this information. Then she turned to face Gary directly. Her eyes were assessing, serious in the way children sometimes are when they're trying to understand something important. Did you like it? She asked. I thought you were wonderful. Gary replied honestly. You danced like you meant every step. Violet's face lit up. I did mean them. Dancing is my favorite thing. She paused, considering. Well, second favorite. Dragons are first. Dragons are excellent. Gary agreed solemnly. Very underrated as favorite things. Violet nodded, apparently satisfied with this response. She had tested him, and he had passed. At least for now. Brenda was watching this exchange with an expression Gary could not quite read. Something between wariness and wonder. Like she was seeing a version of him that she had not expected to exist. A version who could talk to a child without condescension. Who could take a 7-year-old's interest seriously. We're getting ice cream, Brenda said finally. Violet's reward for not running off the stage this time. I almost ran off, Violet admitted cheerfully. But then I remembered that Mommy said I couldn't have ice cream if I did. So I stayed. Very wise. Gary said, ice cream is worth staying for. Brenda hesitated. Gary could see the internal debate playing across her features. The careful weighing of risks and rewards. The protective instinct warring with something else. Something that might have been curiosity or hope. You can come if you want, she finally said. But Gary, this is just ice cream. It doesn't mean anything more than that. I understand, he replied. Just ice cream, nothing more. But as they walked out of the community center together, Violet chattering between them about dragons and dance and the various injustices of first grade, Gary knew that it already meant more than just ice cream. It meant a door had opened, just a crack, just enough to let a sliver of light through. Whether that door stayed open would depend entirely on what he did next. The ice cream shop was a few blocks from the community center, a small place with bright colors and too many toppings and a line of children pressing their faces against the glass display case. Violet immediately began lobbying for the most elaborate sundae on the menu. It has 7 different toppings, Mommy. 7. That's my favorite number. Your favorite number changes every week, Brenda pointed out. That's because I keep finding better numbers. Gary laughed. He could not help it. Violet's logic was both absurd and completely airtight. She has a point, he said to Brenda. 7 is objectively better than most numbers. Brenda shot him a look that was part warning, part amusement. Don't encourage her. But there was no real edge in her voice. Just the resigned affection of a parent who knew she was already going to say yes to the 7-topping sundae. They found a table by the window. Violet sat between them, attacking her sundae with focused determination. Gary had ordered a simple cone. Brenda had gotten tea again. Some things apparently did not change. So, Brenda said once Violet was sufficiently distracted by her ice cream, what did you think? Of the recital? Of my life? Of what you saw today? Of everything you came here to understand? Gary took his time answering. He had learned over the years that quick responses were often wrong responses, that the most important things required careful thought. I think you've built something beautiful, he said finally. I think Violet is extraordinary. I think you're an incredible mother. I think the life you have is exactly what you deserved. And I think you were right to leave. Right to build all of this without me. Because the man I was 10 years ago would have ruined it. He would have been absent and distracted, and so focused on his own ambitions that he would have missed all of it. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. I'm glad you survived me, Brenda. I'm glad you found happiness, even if it breaks something in me to see what I could have had if I had been different. Violet looked up from her sundae. Are you sad, Gary? She asked with the direct concern of a child who had not yet learned to pretend she did not notice adult emotions. A little bit, Gary admitted. But it's a good kind of sad. The kind that reminds you to appreciate what you have instead of just being sad about what you lost. Violet considered this. That's very philosophical, she announced, then returned to her ice cream. Where did she learn the word philosophical? Gary asked Brenda. She reads above her grade level, Brenda said, with a mixture of pride and exasperation, and she watches too much PBS. I like documentaries. Violet contributed without looking up. They teach you things about the world. Did you know that octopuses have 3 hearts? I did not know that. Gary replied. That seems like too many hearts. Violet shrugged. Maybe they just love things more than we do. The conversation continued like that, Violet leading them through a wandering tour of her interests and opinions. Dragons, octopuses, the correct way to eat ice cream, the injustice of bedtimes, the specific friend at school who was not being nice lately, and what should be done about it. Gary listened, really listened, in a way he had never listened to anyone when he was younger. Back then, conversations had been strategic, opportunities to advance his position, moments to demonstrate his intelligence or make connections that might prove useful later. This was different. There was nothing to gain from listening to a 7-year-old explain why purple was the best color. Nothing except the pure pleasure of being present with another human being, of making her feel seen and heard and valued. Is that what he had failed to do with Brenda? Failed to simply listen, simply be present, simply appreciate her without trying to achieve something? Probably, almost certainly. The realization was painful but clarifying. When the ice cream was finished and Violet's energy showed no signs of diminishing, Brenda announced that it was time to go home. Violet protested briefly but was mollified by the promise of a movie night. Say goodbye to Gary, Brenda instructed. Violet looked at Gary with an expression that was evaluating something important. Are you going to come see us again? She asked. If your mom says it's okay, Gary replied. Then I say it's okay, Violet decided. You're nice. And you take dragons seriously. That's important. She hugged him, brief and fierce, the unguarded affection of a child who had not yet learned to protect herself from disappointment. Then she ran toward the door, leaving Brenda and Gary alone at the table. She likes you, Brenda said. Her voice carried surprise she was not bothering to hide. She doesn't usually warm up to people that quickly. Maybe she can tell I'm trying, Gary replied. Maybe she can, Brenda agreed. Or maybe she just appreciates anyone who takes dragons seriously. She stood, gathering her purse and jacket. Thank you for coming today, for being respectful of boundaries, for not trying to force anything. I meant what I said on the phone. I want to know the woman you've become, not recapture the past. If that means following your lead, taking things slow, proving myself through actions instead of words, then that's what I'll do. Brenda studied him for a long moment. We'll see, she finally said. But Gary, don't make promises to her. To Violet, don't make her expect things from you that you're not willing to deliver. I can handle disappointment. She shouldn't have to. I won't disappoint her, Gary promised. I won't disappoint either of you. Not this time. Brenda nodded. Not agreement exactly, more like acknowledgement that she had heard him, that his words had registered even if she was not yet ready to believe them. Then she followed Violet out the door, and Gary was left alone at a table littered with napkins and ice cream wrappers, wondering if he had just been given a second chance, and terrified of what it would mean to actually deserve it. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Gary's life, not because of grand events or dramatic confrontations, but because of their sheer ordinariness. He rented an apartment in Seattle, a modest place by his standards, 2 bedrooms, a simple kitchen, a view of nothing particularly impressive. His board was apoplectic. The Tokyo deal had collapsed completely. His absence had cost the company hundreds of millions in potential value. Gary did not care. He restructured his role, delegated responsibilities to his executive team that he had never trusted anyone to handle before, reduced his involvement in day-to-day operations to something that resembled advisory rather than command. His therapist called it growth. His board called it a midlife crisis. Gary called it finally understanding what mattered. The visits with Brenda and Violet became regular, Saturday afternoons at first, then adding Sunday mornings, then occasionally a Wednesday evening when Brenda had a late meeting and needed someone to pick Violet up from her after-school program. Can I go with Gary? Violet had asked the first time Brenda mentioned needing childcare help. He tells good stories. And he never makes me eat vegetables I don't like. Brenda had looked at Gary with an expression that was half exasperation, half something softer. You're bribing my daughter. I prefer to think of it as negotiating. Gary had replied. She's a tough customer. I respect that. The routine developed gradually, naturally, without the dramatic declarations or grand gestures that had characterized Gary's younger relationships. Instead, there were small moments, helping Violet with her homework, learning to cook because Brenda mentioned she was tired of always making dinner, showing up for soccer games and school plays and the 1,000 tiny events that made up a child's life. He learned Violet's schedule, her friends' names, her favorite books and shows, and the elaborate fantasy world she was building in her imagination. He asked follow-up questions about things she had mentioned days earlier, remembered details that most adults forgot within minutes. You're good with her, Brenda observed one evening. 3 months into this new arrangement, Violet was asleep on the couch between them, exhausted from a day of activity. They were watching some movie that neither of them was really paying attention to. I'm trying to be, Gary replied. She makes it easy. She's so open, so willing to trust. I don't want to be the person who teaches her that trusting is dangerous. Brenda was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft. Her father did that, taught her that trusting was dangerous. He was around for the first 3 years. Then he decided he wasn't cut out for fatherhood and left. She doesn't really remember him, but she remembers the absence. She still asks sometimes why he didn't want to stay. Gary felt anger rise in his chest, at this man he had never met, at the casual cruelty of abandoning a child, at the wounds that Violet would carry forever because someone had decided she was not worth the effort. What do you tell her? I tell her the truth, that some people aren't ready to be parents, that it wasn't her fault, that being left doesn't mean she's not lovable. It just means he couldn't see how lovable she is. That's remarkably generous. It's not generous. It's just true. He wasn't a bad person. He was just a coward. And I'd rather Violet understand that cowardice is a flaw in him than believe that something is wrong with her. Gary thought about his own father, about the constant criticism, the impossible standards, the way he had spent his entire life trying to prove himself to a man who had never believed he was worth anything. You're a good mother, he said. Better than I had. Better than I would have been if things had been different. Brenda looked at him, something shifting in her expression. Do you really believe that? That you would have been a bad father? I believe that the man I was 10 years ago would have been an absent father. Like I was an absent partner. I would have provided, financially, made sure all the practical needs were met. But I wouldn't have been present. Not the way Violet needs. Not the way any child needs. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But I'm not that man anymore. I've done the work, years of it, learning why I was the way I was, learning how to be different. I don't know if I could be a good father, but I know I would try. I know I would show up. Brenda was quiet for a long time. The movie played on. Violet stirred slightly in her sleep, making a small sound of contentment before settling again. I'm scared, Brenda finally admitted, of letting you in, of trusting you with more than just afternoons and dinners, of believing that this version of you is real, that it's permanent. I'm scared too, Gary confessed. Scared I'll mess this up somehow, scared I don't deserve the chance you've already given me, scared that years of proving myself won't be enough to overcome the damage I caused. He turned to face her directly. But I'm here, Brenda. I moved my entire life to be close to Violet. To you. I restructured my company, found a therapist who specializes in attachment issues, learned how to cook because you mentioned once that you were tired of always being the one who made meals. I did all of that whether or not you ever forgave me, because it was the right thing to do, and if I asked for more than just co-parenting, more than just afternoons and dinners. Brenda's voice was barely above a whisper. The answer is yes, Gary replied without hesitation. Absolutely yes, but only when you're ready, only when you believe I've earned it. I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait as long as it takes. Brenda leaned back against the couch cushions, her eyes on the sleeping child between them. I used to dream about this, she said, after I lost the baby. After I left, I would dream about you showing up, changed, ready, finally able to be what I needed. And then I would wake up, and you weren't there, and I would hate myself for still wanting you, for not being able to just move on. I'm sorry, Gary said, For all of it. For making you wait for someone who never came. For making you doubt yourself. For everything. I know, she replied, and I'm starting to believe you. She did not say anything else. Neither did he. They sat in the quiet, Violet sleeping between them, the movie ending unwatched. Two people who had destroyed each other learning, slowly, carefully, how to rebuild something from the ashes. 4 more months passed, winter turning to spring. The relationship between Gary and Brenda deepening in ways that were difficult to define, but impossible to ignore. He had his own key to her house now, his own drawer in her bathroom, his own designated mug that Violet had decorated with purple dragons and proclaimed was only for him forever and ever. They had not discussed what they were to each other, had not put labels on something that was still too fragile for names. But everyone who saw them together understood. The parents at Violet's school, the neighbors who waved when Gary pulled into the driveway, Brenda's friend Elena, who had apparently given her approval after a dinner that had felt like a job interview conducted by someone who was absolutely willing to commit murder if necessary. She threatened to destroy me, Gary had reported to Brenda afterward, in very specific and creative ways. Elena is protective, Brenda had replied. She was there when I was at my worst. She's earned the right to be skeptical. Does she still want to destroy me? Ask me again in 6 months. If you're still here, she'll probably like you. I'll be here, Gary had promised. I'm not going anywhere. And he had meant it, more than he had ever meant anything in his life. One evening, 6 months after the recital, they stood in Brenda's kitchen together. Gary cooking dinner, something he had gotten reasonably good at through repetition and the assistance of approximately 400 YouTube tutorials. Brenda reviewing documents from her foundation, the comfortable silence of two people who no longer needed to fill every moment with words. I have news, Gary said, setting down his spatula. The board has been pressuring me to take a more active role again. There's a major acquisition opportunity. Could add significant value to the company. Would require me to travel extensively for the next 6 months. Brenda's face went still, the walls rebuilding in real time, her body tensing with the anticipation of disappointment that had been trained into her through years of experience. You're leaving. It was not a question. It was a statement, a resignation, the sound of someone who had always known this moment would come. No, Gary replied immediately. I'm not leaving. That's my news. I told them no. I restructured my role permanently, put someone else in charge of acquisitions. I'm stepping back from the day-to-day operations completely. But your company, everything you built, will continue to exist without me running it. I've spent the last 6 months making sure of that, training people, delegating authority, building systems that don't require my constant involvement. He moved closer to her, taking her hands in his. Brenda, I already made my choice. I made it the day I stepped out of that car in the rain. I made it every Saturday when I showed up for Violet's activities. Every dinner I cooked. Every night I spent here instead of in a boardroom. I'm not leaving. I'm not choosing work over you. Not this time. Not ever again. Brenda stared at him, her eyes bright with tears she was not letting fall. I don't understand. Yes, you do, he said gently. You understand exactly what this means. You're just afraid to believe it. What if you regret it? What if you wake up a year from now and realize you gave up everything for nothing? Then I'll know I made the right choice, Gary replied, because everything I gave up was already nothing. Success without people to share it with, achievement without meaning, an empire built by a man who had no one waiting for him when he came home. He reached up, touched her face, wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. I love you, he said simply. I loved you 10 years ago, and I destroyed it because I didn't know what love actually meant. I love you now, and I'm terrified of destroying it again. But I'm not going to let that fear stop me from saying it, from being here, from choosing you every single day for as long as you'll let me. Gary, I know you're not ready to say it back. I know there's still trust to rebuild, still proof to provide. But I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that this isn't just me being convenient. This is me choosing, consciously, deliberately, with everything I have. Brenda was crying now, not the quiet tears of before, but actual sobs, the release of something that had been held too tight for too long. Gary pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried, not trying to fix it, not offering solutions, just being present. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red, but her expression was different. Something had shifted. Some wall had finally come down. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been trying so hard not to, trying to protect myself, trying to remember all the reasons this is dangerous, but I can't stop. I can't pretend I don't feel it." "Then stop pretending," Gary replied. "Stop protecting yourself from me. I'm not going to hurt you again. And if I do, if I somehow fail despite everything, at least you'll know you tried. At least you'll know you gave love a chance." She kissed him then. The first real kiss since their reunion. Not tentative, not careful, but full and desperate and carrying 10 years of longing finally released. When they broke apart, Violet was standing in the kitchen doorway. Her expression was triumphant. "I knew it," she announced. "I told Maya at school that you were going to be my new dad." She said I was making things up, but I wasn't. Brenda laughed through her remaining tears. "You told Maya what?" "I'm very observant, Mommy. Also, Gary looks at you like you're the most important person in the world. That's what dads are supposed to do." Gary knelt down to Violet's level, meeting her eyes directly. "Violet, I want to be part of your family, if you'll have me, but I need you to understand something important." "What?" "I'm not going to replace your dad. I'm not trying to make you forget him or pretend he doesn't exist. I'm just going to be here, showing up, being present, loving you and your mom the best way I know how. Is that okay with you?" Violet considered this with 7-year-old seriousness. "Will you still take dragons seriously? Always? Will you still make pancakes on Sunday? Every Sunday? Will you promise not to leave?" Her voice had shifted. Smaller now, carrying the weight of the wound her biological father had left. The fear that everyone eventually leaves. "I promise," Gary said. "I'm not going anywhere. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. You're stuck with me now." Violet smiled. That enormous trusting smile that made Gary's heart ache with its openness. "Okay then," she said. "You can be my dad. But I'm keeping my last name because Delacroix sounds cooler than Reyes." She skipped off toward the living room, apparently considering the matter settled. Gary stood up and found Brenda watching him with an expression that made everything he had sacrificed feel worth it. "You're stuck with us now," she said. "You heard her." "I heard her," Gary agreed, "and I've never been happier to be stuck anywhere." They finished making dinner together, Violet joining them with running commentary about her day and her opinions and her plans for the Dragon Kingdom she was building in her imagination. It was ordinary, domestic, the kind of evening that millions of families experienced every single day without thinking about how precious it was. But Gary thought about it, appreciated it, held on to every moment with the fierce gratitude of someone who understood exactly how easily it could all have been lost. This is what he had been looking for, not success, not achievement, not the validation of a dead father who had never believed in him anyway. Just this, just showing up, just being present, just loving and being loved in return. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The year that followed was the happiest of Gary's life. Not because of grand achievements or public recognition, but because of the small, ordinary moments that he had spent so long dismissing as unimportant. Morning coffee with Brenda while Violet slept in on weekends, helping with homework that sometimes required him to relearn mathematics he had forgotten decades ago. Sunday dinners that had become a tradition. Family movie nights where Violet got to choose the film and usually chose something involving dragons. Gary had never understood the appeal of ordinary life, had never comprehended why people settled for small happiness when bigger things were within reach. Now he understood. Ordinary life was not settling. It was arriving. Finally reaching the destination after years of running towards something that had never really existed. He and Brenda had talked about the future. Marriage. Maybe more children if they were not too old for such things. Moving into a bigger house that could accommodate their growing family. Plans that stretched forward into decades rather than quarters. For the first time in his life, Gary was building something he actually wanted to keep. And then Tokyo called. The merger he had walked away from 18 months earlier, the deal that had collapsed because of his absence. It was back, restructured, bigger than before, and his board was demanding his involvement. "Mr. Reyes, I understand you've stepped back from day-to-day operations." The voice on the phone belonged to Harrison Webb, the chairman of his board. A man Gary had known for 20 years. A man who had made his displeasure with Gary's choices abundantly clear over the past year and a half. But this situation is extraordinary. The Tanaka Corporation specifically requested you. They remember the initial negotiations. They trust you. They don't trust anyone else on your team. Gary stood at the window of his Seattle apartment, the one he barely used anymore since he spent most nights at Brenda's house. The city stretched out below him, gray and wet as always, beautiful in its particular Seattle way. What exactly are you asking, Harrison? 3 months in Tokyo, minimum. Possibly longer depending on how negotiations proceed. The deal is worth significantly more than the original proposal. If we close this, it cements your legacy. It puts Reyes Global in a position that your competitors cannot touch. And if I say no, then we proceed without you. Henderson will lead the negotiations. He's competent, but he's not you. The Tanaka family specifically said they want you at the table. Without you, there's a significant chance the deal falls apart again. Gary closed his eyes, feeling the weight of everything he had built pressing down on him. The company that bore his name, the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on its success, the shareholders who had trusted him with their investments, and against all of that, Brenda, Violet, the life he had chosen, the promises he had made. When do you need an answer? 48 hours. After that, we either commit or walk away. There's no middle ground here. I'll call you back. Gary ended the call and stood in the silence of his apartment. The decision should have been easy. He had already chosen, had already restructured his entire life around being present, around not repeating the mistakes of his past. But this was different. This was not just another deal. This was the culmination of everything he had spent 20 years building, the final piece of a puzzle he had been assembling since before he met Brenda. And some part of him, some small, treacherous part that still sounded like his father, wanted it. He needed to talk to Brenda. You're quiet tonight. Brenda observed over dinner. Violet was at a sleepover. The house was unusually still. Just the two of them at a table that usually felt fuller. Gary had been trying to find the right words for hours, had rehearsed different approaches in his head. None of them felt adequate for what he needed to say. I got a call today, from my board. He saw her face change, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her shoulders drew up just a fraction. She was already anticipating bad news, already preparing for disappointment. The Tokyo deal, the one I walked away from. It's back, bigger than before. They want me to go. 3 months minimum. Brenda set down her fork, her movements careful, controlled, the way she moved when she was trying very hard not to feel something. You're leaving. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of what she had always known would eventually happen. No, Gary said immediately. I'm not leaving. I'm telling you about it because I promised to be honest with you. Because I promised not to make decisions without including you. But I already know what I'm going to do. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell them no. I'm going to let Henderson handle it. I'm going to stay here, with you, with Violet, where I belong. Brenda was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something. Doubt, maybe, or deception. The signs that this was just another pretty speech from a man who had always been good with words. Gary, this is your company, your legacy. Everything you spent 20 years building. None of it matters without you. He reached across the table and took her hand. I figured that out 18 months ago. Standing in the rain, watching a flight to Tokyo leave without me. I chose you then. I'm choosing you now. I'll choose you every single time. But what if you regret it? What if years from now you look back and realize you gave up everything for? For what? For the woman I love. For the family I never thought I'd have. For the chance to be present for Violet's childhood, instead of spending it in conference rooms on the other side of the world. He squeezed her hand. Brenda, my father spent his entire life building things. Companies, reputation, wealth, and he died alone, in the middle of an argument, without a single person who actually loved him in the room. I am not going to be my father. I am not going to sacrifice everything that matters for things that don't. You could go. 3 months is not forever. We could make it work. Video calls, visits. No. Gary's voice was firm. That's exactly how it started before. One trip, one deal, One meeting that couldn't be missed, and then another, and another, until I was always gone, and you were always waiting. I won't do that to you again. I won't do that to Violet. She trusted me. She trusted me not to leave. I'm not going to break that trust for any deal, no matter how big. Brenda's eyes were bright with tears she was trying not to shed. You've really changed. It was not a question this time. It was a realization, a final acceptance of something she had been afraid to believe. I had to. The man I was didn't deserve you, didn't deserve any of this. I had to become someone better, someone worthy. He stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair the way he had knelt before Violet months ago. I love you, more than any deal, more than any legacy, more than anything I've ever built or achieved. You and Violet are my life now. Everything else is just noise. Brenda pulled him up and kissed him, hard and desperate. The release of fear she had been carrying for months. The final surrender to hope she had been afraid to feel. When they broke apart, she was crying openly. I was so scared, she admitted. When you said Tokyo, I thought this is it. This is where he chooses his company over us. This is where I find out that nothing has really changed. I know, Gary said softly. I know that fear. I know I put it there. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving you don't need to feel it anymore. They held each other in the quiet kitchen, the dinner growing cold on the table, neither of them caring about food or schedules or anything except this moment, this choice, this promise kept. The next morning, Gary called Harrison Webb. My answer is no. Gary, be reasonable. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. No, this is an opportunity, one of many. But my lifetime belongs to my family now. Henderson can handle the negotiations. I have full confidence in him. The Tanaka family specifically requested, then tell them I'm not available. Tell them I've taken a permanent step back from acquisitions. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. But I'm not going to Tokyo. Not for 3 months. Not for 3 weeks. Not at all. There was silence on the line. Gary could practically hear Harrison recalculating, adjusting his strategy, trying to find the angle that would change Gary's mind. You're making a mistake, Harrison finally said. No, Gary replied. I made my mistakes 10 years ago. I'm finally learning from them. He ended the call and looked out the window at the Seattle morning. Gray clouds, light rain, the city going about its business without him. For the first time in his professional life, Gary Reyes felt completely at peace with walking away. Before we continue with what happens next, I need to speak directly to you. This is the moment that defines everything. The moment that separates people who talk about change from people who actually change. Gary had every reason to go to Tokyo. His legacy, his company, his reputation, everything he had spent 2 decades building, and he walked away from all of it. Without hesitation, without regret, because he finally understood something that had taken him 40 years to learn. Success without love is just expensive loneliness. Achievement without presence is just a different kind of failure. If this story is speaking to you, if you've ever faced a choice between what the world says matters and what actually matters, drop a comment below telling me about it. I read every single comment, and your story might help someone else find the courage to make the hard choice. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear that second chances are possible. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're approaching the end of this journey, and I promise you, what comes next is worth staying for. Now let me tell you about the ordinary evening that changed everything. 6 months after Gary turned down Tokyo, 6 months of continued showing up, continued presence, continued proof that he was exactly who he had promised to be. Violet had finished 2nd grade with honors. Brenda's foundation had expanded into 2 new cities. Gary had settled into his advisory role with a contentment that surprised everyone who had known him before. It was a Thursday evening, unremarkable in every way. Gary was helping Violet with her homework at the kitchen table, while Brenda finished a conference call in the other room. Fractions were proving difficult, not because Violet could not understand them, but because she found them philosophically objectionable. Why do we need to cut things into pieces? She demanded. Why can't we just have whole things? Sometimes things are too big to handle all at once, Gary explained patiently. Fractions help us work with smaller pieces until we can put them together into something whole. Violet considered this, like how you and Mommy got together, in pieces instead of all at once. Gary blinked. caught off guard by the metaphorical leap of a 7-year-old mind. Yes, actually, exactly like that. We couldn't figure everything out all at once. We had to take it in smaller pieces until it added up to something whole. Is it whole now? Violet asked. I think so, Gary replied. I hope so. Violet nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. She returned to her fractions with renewed determination. Gary watched her work, marveling at how naturally she had become part of his life, how completely she had rewritten his understanding of what mattered. Brenda returned from her call looking tired but pleased. The Phoenix expansion is approved, she announced. We break ground on the new facility next month. That's wonderful, Gary said. Congratulations. Mommy is saving the world. Violet contributed without looking up from her math. One city at a time. Brenda laughed. I don't know about saving the world, but we're helping where we can. She joined them at the table, looking over Violet's shoulder at the homework. Fractions, yes, and they are terrible. Violet declared, why can't math just be about counting? Counting is easy. Life is not always easy, baby. Sometimes we have to learn hard things. Violet sighed dramatically, the theatrical exasperation of a child who had not yet learned that drama was optional. Fine, but when I grow up, I'm going to invent a new kind of math where fractions don't exist. I'll invest in that company, Gary said seriously. You'll be the first call I make. Violet grinned, then returned to her work with the focused determination she brought to everything. She was so much like her mother, stubborn, passionate, unwilling to give up even when things were difficult. Gary loved her fiercely, loved both of them, in ways he had not known he was capable of feeling. The homework was eventually completed. Dinner was made and eaten. The evening routine proceeded with the comfortable predictability of family life. Bath time, story time, the negotiations over exactly how many extra minutes Violet could stay up. Gary was reading the bedtime story when Violet interrupted him. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you going to marry Mommy? The question landed in the quiet room like a small explosion. Gary looked down at the serious face of the child who had somehow become his whole world. Why do you ask? Because you're here all the time, and you look at her like she's the most important person in the world. And Maya's mom said that's what people do when they're going to get married. Maya's mom is very observant, Gary said carefully. Would you be okay with that? If I married your mom? Violet considered the question with the seriousness she applied to all important matters. Only if you promise to stay forever. My first dad left. I don't want you to leave too. Gary set down the book and turned to face her fully. Violet, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you do that? She nodded, her eyes wide and trusting. I am not going anywhere, not ever. I promise you, on everything I am, on everything I have, I will be here for you. For your mom, for our family, every single day, for the rest of my life. Even when I'm annoying, especially when you're annoying, that's when family matters most. When things are hard, when people are difficult, showing up anyway is what makes a family real. Violet smiled, that enormous, trusting smile that still made Gary's heart ache with its openness. Okay, she said. You can marry her. I approve. Thank you. I'll try to live up to your expectations. You'd better. She settled back against her pillows, apparently satisfied with the arrangement. Now finish the story. We're at the good part. Gary finished the story, kissed her forehead, turned off the light, and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her settle into sleep. This child who had accepted him so completely, who had given him a chance to be the father he never thought he could be. He found Brenda in the kitchen, finishing the last of the dishes. She's asleep, Gary reported, but not before conducting a thorough interrogation about my intentions toward her mother. Brenda laughed softly. She's been asking about that for weeks. I told her to ask you directly. She did, and apparently I passed inspection. I have been granted permission to marry you. Brenda turned to face him, her expression amused but also something else, something more vulnerable. Permission from Violet, but not from me. Gary moved closer, taking the dish towel from her hands, setting it aside. Brenda, I've been carrying something around for 3 weeks, trying to find the perfect moment, the perfect words. But I'm starting to realize there is no perfect moment. There's just now. There's just us. What are you talking about? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her eyes widened. Her breath caught. I bought this a month ago. I've been planning elaborate scenarios, romantic dinners, sunset proposals, all the things that movies say you're supposed to do. But that's not us. We didn't come together through grand gestures. We came together through showing up, through ordinary moments that added up to something extraordinary. He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Simple, elegant, a diamond flanked by smaller stones that caught the kitchen light. Brenda, I love you. I love Violet. I love the life we've built together. I love who I've become since you gave me a second chance. Will you marry me? Not because of some romantic setting or perfect timing, but because I don't want to wait another day to ask. Because every moment I spend with you feels like the moment I should have asked already. Brenda was crying again, but smiling through the tears. The combination of emotions that had become familiar over their months together. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Of course, yes. Yes, to all of it. Gary slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. He had asked Elena for Brenda's ring size weeks ago, swearing her to secrecy under threat of unspecified but severe consequences. Elena is going to be insufferable, Brenda observed, looking at the ring. She's been dropping hints about this for weeks. Elena is already insufferable. That's why we love her. Gary pulled Brenda into his arms, holding her close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, marveling at how far they had come from that rainy Seattle street corner. Thank you, he said into her hair. For what? For giving me a second chance. For believing I could change. For letting me be part of your family. Brenda pulled back to look at his face. You earned it. Every bit of it. You showed up. You kept showing up. Even when I pushed you away. Even when I tested you. I'll keep earning it. Every day. For the rest of our lives. You'd better. She echoed Violet's words with a smile. We have high standards in this family. They stood in the kitchen, holding each other, the engagement ring catching light, the future stretching out before them in ways neither had dared to imagine 18 months ago. It was not a fairy tale ending. There would still be challenges ahead, difficult days, moments when old fears resurfaced, the ongoing work of building trust and maintaining connection. But they had proven something that mattered more than perfection. They had proven that broken things could be mended, that people could change, that second chances, when earned through consistent action, could become the foundation for something stronger than what had come before. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. Elena stood as maid of honor, having finally and thoroughly approved of Gary after a year and a half of careful observation. Violet served as flower girl, scattering purple petals down the aisle because she had insisted that traditional colors were boring. Gary's board members were not invited. Neither were the business associates who had once formed the entirety of his social circle. He had realized, in the process of planning the wedding, that most of those relationships had been transactional, useful for deals, meaningless for anything that actually mattered. The ceremony was held in a garden, Brenda's choice, simple and beautiful, and surrounded by flowers that bloomed despite the Seattle gray. Gary stood at the altar, watching Brenda walk toward him in a dress that was elegant without being ostentatious. She was radiant, not because of the dress or the setting or any of the external trappings, but because of who she was, who she had become, who they had become together, the vows they had written themselves. Brenda, Gary said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. 12 years ago, I met you and fell in love with you. I didn't know how to love anyone back then. Not really. I was too broken, too focused on proving myself, too afraid to be vulnerable. I hurt you. Badly. In ways that I can never fully repair. I failed you when you needed me most, and I lost you because of it. But you gave me something I didn't deserve. A second chance. A chance to prove that people can change. That the mistakes we make don't have to define us forever. He took her hands in his. I promise to show up. Every day. In the small moments and the big ones. I promise to be present, to listen, to put you and Violet first, always. I promise to keep earning your trust, every day for the rest of my life, not because I have to, but because you deserve someone who never stops trying to be worthy of you. I love you. Today, tomorrow, forever. Brenda's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling, That beautiful smile that had first captured his heart in a coffee shop in Portland over a decade ago. "Gary," she said, her voice clear despite the emotion. "I spent 10 years trying to forget you, trying to convince myself that I was better off without you, trying to build walls high enough that no one could ever hurt me the way you did. But walls that keep pain out also keep love out. I learned that the hard way." She squeezed his hands. "When I saw you standing in the rain on that Seattle street corner, I wanted to run. I wanted to protect myself, to maintain the distance I had worked so hard to create. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was just curiosity. Maybe it was the part of me that never stopped loving you, no matter how hard I tried to kill it. I'm grateful for that moment, for the courage it took to give you a chance, for your willingness to prove day after day that you had really changed. I promise to keep letting you in, to trust you with the parts of me that are still healing, to build a future with you instead of running from the past. I love you, not the man you were, the man you've become, the man you're still becoming, today, tomorrow, forever." The officiant pronounced them married. Gary kissed his bride. Violet cheered enthusiastically from the front row, her flower basket empty and her purple dress covered in petals she had thrown with excessive enthusiasm. Elena was crying openly. Several of Brenda's foundation colleagues were dabbing at their eyes. Even Marcus, Gary's former driver, whom he had invited as a friend rather than employee, seemed to be struggling with emotion. It was, by any objective measure, a relatively modest wedding. No celebrity guests, no media coverage, no $100,000 flower arrangements or destination locations. But for the people present, it was perfect. A celebration of second chances, a testament to the possibility of change, a promise that broken things could be made whole again if both people were willing to do the work. 2 years later, Gary stood in the doorway of Violet's room, watching her struggle with a math problem. She was 9 now, growing so fast it sometimes took his breath away. "It's the same principle as fractions," he offered from the doorway. "Dad," she protested, "I told you, I'm going to invent math without fractions. I believe in your vision. But until then, you still have to pass 4th grade." She sighed dramatically but returned to her work with renewed focus. Gary smiled and moved on to the next room, the nursery. They had converted the guest bedroom 6 months ago, painted the walls a soft green because Brenda had refused to subscribe to gendered color expectations, installed a crib that Gary had insisted on assembling himself despite having no relevant skills whatsoever. The baby was asleep, a boy they had named Daniel, 3 months old and already the center of everyone's universe, especially Violet's, who had taken to her role as big sister with a seriousness that bordered on professional dedication. Gary stood over the crib, watching his son sleep. His son, words he had never expected to say, a reality he had never expected to live. He thought about the man he had been 10 years ago, the man who had canceled dinner to fly to Chicago while the woman he loved sat alone in their apartment, pregnant and terrified. The man who had chosen ambition over everything else, who had built an empire while losing everything that actually mattered. That man was gone, not through magic or overnight transformation, but through years of deliberate work, therapy, self-examination, the daily choice to show up even when it was difficult, the constant practice of putting others first. He was not perfect. He still struggled sometimes, still caught himself slipping into old patterns of prioritizing achievement over presence, still had to remind himself that success was not measured in dollars or deals. But he was better, genuinely, profoundly better, and he was surrounded by people who loved him, who trusted him, who had given him the chance to become someone worthy of that love and trust. Brenda appeared beside him, slipping her arm around his waist, leaning her head against his shoulder. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "He has your eyes," Gary said. "He has your stubbornness." "That's fair." They stood together in the quiet nursery, their son sleeping peacefully, their daughter working on math problems in the next room, their life stretching out before them in a way neither had dared to imagine all those years ago. "Do you ever think about it?" Brenda asked. "About what? About what would have happened if you hadn't stopped the car? If you had just kept going to the airport that day?" Gary was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Sometimes, usually at 3 in the morning when I can't sleep. I think about how close I came to missing all of this, how a single moment, a single decision changed everything. Do you regret anything? Only the years I wasted. Only the pain I caused you. Only the time we lost. He tightened his arm around her. But I try not to dwell on regret too much. It doesn't change anything. And we have so much now. So much more than I ever thought I'd have. Brenda turned to face him fully. I'm glad you stopped the car, she said. I'm glad I gave you a second chance. I'm glad we found our way back to each other. I'm glad too, Gary replied. Every single day. I'm glad. They kissed softly, careful not to wake the baby. The gentle intimacy of two people who had learned to love each other through difficulty, who had built something real from the wreckage of something that had shattered. In the other room, Violet made a sound of triumph. I figured it out, she called. Dad, I figured out the fractions. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Gary called back. I knew you could do it. He looked at Brenda, at the life they had built, at the family that had grown from second chances and consistent effort and the courage to believe that people could change. This was what success actually looked like. Not buildings with his name on them, not magazine covers or Forbes lists or billion-dollar deals, but this, a sleeping baby, a daughter conquering fractions, a wife who had trusted him enough to let him back in, showing up every single day, whether it was convenient or not, whether there were mergers to close or empires to build, choosing presence over productivity, connection over achievement, love over everything else. It was not always easy. Some days were harder than others, but easy had never been the point. The point was this moment, this family, this life that he had almost thrown away, and somehow, through grace and effort, and the love of a woman who had believed in second chances, managed to save. And that is where our story ends. Not with a fairy tale, not with a perfect happily ever after where nothing ever goes wrong, but with something better, something real. Two people who destroyed each other found a way back, not because of fate or destiny or any magical force, but because they chose to do the work, chose to show up, chose to become better than they were. Gary Reyes canceled a flight to Tokyo to chase a woman on a Seattle street corner. It was the most impulsive decision of his carefully calculated life, and it was the only decision that ever truly mattered. If this story has moved you, if it has given you hope that broken things can be mended, that people can change, that second chances are possible when we are willing to earn them, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second, but it helps more than you know. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in redemption, someone who is wondering whether it is too late for them, someone who needs to know that showing up consistently can heal even the deepest wounds. Subscribe to Mr. Dawson Stories if you have not already, because this is what we do here. We tell stories about the messy, complicated, beautiful truth of human transformation. Stories that remind us that we are not defined by our worst moments, that our past does not have to dictate our future. Drop a comment telling me what you think. Did Gary deserve his second chance? What would you have done in Brenda's position? Would you have stopped the car? Your voice matters in this community we are building together. Every comment, every like, every share, it all matters. Until next time, remember this. It is never too late to become the person you should have been all along. The only question is whether you are brave enough to start. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this journey. And thank you for believing in the power of stories to change lives. I will see you in the next one.